Welcome. Today I'm going to install Git on macOS. The general process we're going to follow. First of all, I have some general notes about I have some installation notes that I do in general. First of all, I want to start off with some general installation notes. I'll be featuring the Google Chrome web browser since I'll do that on all of my courses for consistency. I've made a few operating system adjustments for fewer distractions and better viewing. And you might be wondering why bother watching an installation video. However, there are several reasons why. First of all, although it's not terribly hard to walk through the installation process, there are a few tricks along the way, including setting up the prompt, which on macOS is kind of important. I also like to show all my work. However, for those that are interested, I do have installation notes. In general, the process will be installing Git. Then I'll introduce you to how to get help and online documentation for Git. We'll set up the minimal configuration required for Git. Then it will set up the Git Prompt, which is a special script required to set up a really nice way of looking at our Git repositories while in the command line. We'll start off with Git from Apple. This will be provided to us by the command line developer tools. The only disadvantage I see is that the Git version is slightly behind. However, it is pretty easy and it doesn't cause any conflicts. So this is really my recommended approach. There is a slight issue with operating system updates. Every time a major operating system update, like going from 10.12 to 10.13 and so on, requires doing a reinstall of the developer. It requires doing a reinstall of the command line developer tools. It's not that big a deal, but it is something to keep in mind. The installation process really is as simple as asking Git for its version. If you already have Xcode installed, then Git will respond with its version number. Otherwise, macOS will prompt you to install Git via the command line developer tools. And this is what it looks like when we attempt to get our Git version and we don't have Git installed. Let's go ahead and try that out now. I'm starting off in my Mac, and I already have my terminal program open. I'm currently in my user's home directory, although for these commands it's not going to matter that much. Apple ships with a symlink to Git, but there's nothing behind it. So if we ask the Git command for its version, we get prompted to install Git via the command line developer tools. If you don't have Xcode installed and you do plan on using Xcode, you can click on Get Xcode, which will take you to the Mac App Store to download the full version of Xcode. Doing so, you'll get everything included, including the Git binary. Or if you don't want to install Xcode or never plan to use Xcode, you can simply install only the command line developer tools by clicking on Install. Let's do that now. We'll be prompted for the license agreement. Of course, I recommend reading through this, but for now, I'll just click on Agree. Of course, this is going to take several minutes. That's okay. I'll be able to fix this in post by speeding this up quite a bit, but for those on the live stream, this can take quite a long time. All right, looks like that our software development tools, it looks like the command line tools have finished installing. Click on Done. And now I can test to see if Git is truly installed by asking for the version. So type in git space version, and we should have a version of Git that is relatively recent, but maybe not the absolute latest version. All right, let's look at getting help with Git. I'm going to show two ways of getting help, using the command line as well as going online. Let's start with the command line. We simply type git help. We get a nice list of commands on how to use the git command, where along that with several different options and subcommands. And towards the bottom, it tells us how to get a little bit more help about specific commands, or how to get a listing of all the available subcommands. So we do git help -a, and that gives us a nice listing of all the commands that are available. One of the next commands we'll be using coming up will be the config command. So let's get help on that. So we can type git help and then the name of the command we want help about, which is config. If we do that and press enter, we're put into a man style page directly within the terminal. We can use the arrow keys to sort of go up and down by line, or we can page by using the spacebar. Once we're done looking at our help on the man page, we can quit by pressing Q. That takes us back to our terminal. An alternative syntax to this would be git help would be git, then the command we're interested in, which is config, then passing in the -- help option. That gets us to the same place. So either direction you go will be fine. We can even combine the two by getting help on help. So git help, that is the command, -- help option. Now we have the man page for the help command itself. Another way to get help is to go to the official Git website. If we bring up our web browser, which in my case is Google Chrome, and navigate to the official Git website at git-sem.com. Once that page loads, find the documentation area. So here it's on the main page. You can click into documentation. Then within there, find the reference manual. This reference manual provides a nice listing of the different commands that are available, grouped by functionality. And right here under Setup and Config, we have our config command. So we can click on that to go to that specific page about the config subcommand. You can go back to the documentation and to the reference manual, and you click on other options as well. So you can navigate around here and learn more about the various different commands that are available within the Git ecosystem. All right, well, that's enough for getting help. One of the disadvantages to using the help is sometimes it can be a little bit on the technical side, which if you're just starting out can be a little overwhelming. But as you get familiar with Git and some of the nomenclature associated with Git, the documentation starts to make sense a little bit better. All right, now it's time to set up the minimal configuration for Git and a few more settings as well. I'm currently in my user's home directory, but for these commands, it won't matter that much. We're going to start with the config command, or the config subcommand. Git config -- global. Now I'm using -- global because we want to save these settings into our user's home directory. Now it may seem a little odd because in my mind anyway, global means global, like across the entire computer system. But apparently that's more like a system level thing where the system level is at the installation folder or the installation location for Git. But global actually means user level. So I guess you could think of it as it's global for all your repositories. So in order to set the configuration item at the global or user level, we have to use the -- global flag for those settings. The first setting we need to set is user.name. And then in double quotes, we need to provide our name. So I'm providing my name and then press enter. Now we're just going to do something similar for the next setting. Git config -- global user.email. Then double quotes, put in your email address. Now I recommend making sure that the email address you set here is in agreement with the email address you plan to use on GitHub. So I'm going to use my student at Radiant Training email address. Make sure you use your own email address. If you're particularly sensitive about your email settings or privacy, and you're planning on using GitHub, GitHub does have a @no-reply type email address you can use. You can look that up on the GitHub website. And I do believe that many of the other services or hosting services for Git also have some sort of similar privacy-conscious email address you can use. However, that actually doesn't serve anyone. It doesn't really help out a whole lot because the whole point of this is to track who is making these commits. All right, we've set both the username and the email address. That's technically the only settings we absolutely have to set in order to do very much with Git. However, while I'm here, there's a couple more settings I want to set. So git config -- global. Now I want to set the core editor or the main editor that we'll use with Git. So type core.editor, and then we're going to specify Nano. And we're going to do that because I want to at least start out using Nano as my main editor. And Nano is actually a pretty nice command line based editor that is a lot easier to use than VI in my opinion. The next one we'll do git config -- global push.default and set this to simple. Now the push.default simply talks about, is referring to the default way of pushing changes. And we'll cover this a little later, but basically, prior to Git 2.0, there was a different method or a different default. And leading up to 2.0, from I believe starting in Git 1.8, they started warning everyone that they were going to make this change. However, they kept warning people even after 2.0 that this change was made. So even though the new default is simple, even after that change was made, Git would still warn you that simple is now the default. In order to hush that, I've discovered that you can simply set that value and then Git won't remind you. So I simply do that so that I don't risk the big long warning message from Git telling me about the upcoming change or the change that just happened. I believe at some point they'll probably stop warning people, but I still seen that warning message from time to time. All right. All right, now we can list out all the settings we have so far with git config --global --list. That simply prints out all the different settings we have into our terminal so that we can see them. There's another way to look at this as well. We can simply use the cat command to display everything within the .git config file in our user's home directory. So to make sure that we hit our user's home directory, I'm going to preface this with tilde, which is an alias for my user's home directory, /.git config. I'm using tab completion, which helps confirm that file does actually exist. Now, if I press enter, I have the file contents echoed out. And it kind of looks like a Windows INI file, where we have a section in brackets. So we have the user section, we have a core section, we have a push section, followed by individual attributes. So we have attributes equals the value that's indented a bit. Of course, we can open this with any text editor we want. So we can use Nano and do the same thing. Once inside of Nano, you can exit by doing Control X. And we can actually confirm that the core editor setting works by using git config --global -e. This will force Git to open the configuration file using the core editor, which in this case is Nano. All right, let's go ahead and close that. All right, now that we have our Git configuration set up, let's move on to setting up our Git prompt. There's a few other bash shell environment tweaks as well. So we'll handle all of that all at one time. So back over here, I'm going to open up my web browser again because I have saved off some of my... So I've saved off some files that I want to leverage. So I've saved off some files I want to leverage on my own GitHub account. So I'm going to open up my browser and go to github.com/Taylor Training, Taylor-Training-Courses. If you go that far, just press enter. When that loads, that actually loads my GitHub organization, Taylor-Training-Courses. Within there, I have an installations repository. So click on that. And I have a folder called Mac. Then we go into Setup, and we'll start with the bash profile. Now, the bash profile I have here is super simple. All it does is check for the existence of the bash RC file, and it will include it as part of the bash profile. So when the bash profile executes, any contents in bash RC will be executed as well. You click on raw, and that way we get a complete version of this without any extra fluff. We can copy the contents of that file and head back to our terminal. Let's use Nano to create a bash RC file. We do need to make sure that we are in our user's home directory. If you find yourself somewhere else, you can just simply use CD. That's for change directory, but if you don't specify anything and just do CD, it will make sure that it lands you in your home directory. Once there, do nano space and then .bash _ profile. Now here I'm just going to paste in the contents of my clipboard. Once I have finished doing that, I'm going to press Control X to begin the exit process. Nano will detect that I have changes and will prompt me, hey, do you want to save the changes? So I'm going to press Y for yes. Nano gives me an opportunity to change the name of the file, but since I passed it into Nano when I brought up Nano, there's no need to do that. So press enter to continue with the name we provided earlier. Now if we do an ls, that won't show us anything because it's a dot file, and dot files are hidden by default. So instead, we have to do an ls-a. Now it shows us all the dot files and folders. And if you look carefully, we should now have a .bash profile. All right, there's another file that we need to include, and that is the actual bash RC file. So we go back to the Mac directory and go into Git, and we're going to use the bash RC file from our Git directory. This one has a lot more code here. And go into raw, and I'm going to copy the entire contents of this file. Head back over to terminal. Once again, nano, and then .bash RC. Once here, let's just paste in the contents of the clipboard. Now here, since I know that we have things that overrun the maximum length of the lines, I just want to make sure nothing wrapped by default. Looks like everything looks okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save. Control X, press Y, press enter. ls-a, I see that we have our bash RC file along with our bash _ profile. All right, that's great. Let's look at this file to see what it's actually doing. So I'm going to back up because it looks a little better inside of the main interface for Git, for back on GitHub, because it has that syntax highlighting, which is nice. The first two lines simply export out a couple of environment variables. The first environment variable simply enables the colors within the terminal. And then ls colors sets the color scheme for the ls command. This sets up a bash alias, which is another way of creating commands from other commands. So I'm creating an ll command from the ls command with a few options here. The -a, l, and h options. Then I have a nice little if statement. It's looking for a file to exist. That will be the .git-prompt.sh file. If it exists in my user's home directory, that's prefaced by the tilde, then it will include it in the source and execute any code that's available in there. That's a special script, which we'll get in just a minute, that allows us to set up a special prompt. So if it exists, it'll set up the prompt and it will add some colorization, which is what all these special characters are. And then it'll use the special function that's part of the Git Prompt shell script. That is the $get_ps1 function. This is especially helpful when we're going to be inside any kind of Git repositories. It'll still look pretty cool when we're not inside a Git repo, but it really shines when we are inside one. Now, let's follow the instructions we have that are part of the comments here. It tells me that I need to get the source for this particular shell script from this location. And I actually need to update this one for the full URL to it. I actually have a shortcut for that. Have it in another location. I'll update the other file as well, but under my Windows directory for the same bashrc file, I have the curl command that I'll use. It's the exact same Git Prompt script, but I just happen to put the curl command in here. Oh, I didn't notice it. I actually have the curl command right here, so we'll use this. So I'm going to use the curl command that is right under the source. I'm going to hop back over to my terminal and use that exact same command. So I'm going to paste in the command, then press enter. And that should download that command to the .git-prompt.sh file. So if we type in ls-a, we should have the .git-prompt.sh file. Great, now let's exit out of the terminal and restart it. And we're actually done with our browser, so we can close out. Let's fire up our terminal. And now the terminal will be different. You see it's much shorter here, and I just have my username, colon, and then the directory I'm in. When we get to a Git repository, it'll show us which branch we're in as well. But that will only display if we're inside a Git directory. All right, let's review what we just did and look at other installation options. Like I mentioned before, if you do a Mac update, and I'm not talking about patches, I'm talking about what we call what I'm referring to are the major OS updates every year. So when we go from Sierra to High Sierra, and then eventually go up to whatever comes afterwards, and so on and so forth. So 10.12, 10.13, 10.14, etc. I'm not talking about 10.13.6 to 10.13.7. The patch updates seem to have no effect on the command line tools. But when we go to the major yearly update, for some reason, they always get broken. So when that happens, you have to run xcode select with the -- install option. Doing that will sort of rerun that whole installation of the command line tools, and then you'll be able to verify Git by asking for its version again. There are other ways of installing Git. You could get the official Mac install image from git-sem. That's the official website and the official Mac install image. You can use Homebrew to install it. If you already have Homebrew installed, just use that to install Git. You can also use MacPorts if you use that one as your package manager. However, these other options are not perfect. You may have to update your path in order to have these all work. And sometimes it does cause confusion with the Apple-supplied version of Git, especially if you have Xcode installed. So those are one of the reasons why I don't bother with any of these other ways. I usually go straight for using the version of Git that just comes with the command line tools. If you're so inclined, you can use Homebrew. It's simply brew install git. You may have to update your path and, of course, verify Git by doing git version. That's to make sure that you actually get the version of Git that's installed by Homebrew. With Mac ports, you'll probably have to use sudo and the port command install git. And then, of course, verify with git version. And that's all. I do have some installation notes for those that prefer that approach, and those will be available on my website. And on YouTube, I'll provide a link in the description to those installation notes.